Hello, my name is Tony, and this is a review of a film that has become a neglected classic of British cinema, Richard Fleischer's 1971 true-life serial killer drama, 10 Rillington Place. The British are famous for being the originators of lots of things: cricket, rugby, football, colonialism, roast beef dinners, and serial killers, to name a few. Of course, the term serial killer was first minted in America to describe the activities of one Edward Theodore Bundy back in the 70s. It could just as easily have been ascribed to that Victorian Brit prototype slaughterer of innocents, Jack the Ripper. Yes, folks, although there most certainly had been other nutbar multiple murderers preceding him or her, Jack nailed it down for the modern world by being the first to achieve prominent celebrity status in the newspaper media of the time, and to generate a lasting mythology, an industry of films, books, documentaries, debates, ongoing investigations, and pointless walking tours for half-wit rubes. For Jack was never identified or caught, and a public fascination that endures to this day was born as a result. What do we know about serial killers? Well, they are almost always white males. Their victims are mostly women. The United States has cornered the market. That's where most of them are these days. Oh, they fall into two categories: organised and disorganised. Organised have a victim type and a specific modus operandi, like Saucy Jack, Bundy, Sutcliffe, Zodiac. Whereas disorganised serial killers are random opportunists like Richard Ramirez. You would imagine they'd be easy to catch. I mean, if you creep around knocking off people on a regular basis, surely the fuzz would nail your ass pretty damn quick. Frankly, it's an obtrusive pastime after all. Well, not really. Some manage to evade detection for years, decades even, and some get away with it forever. Those who are caught tend to come undone due to bad luck, depending on how you define bad luck. Happenstance, fate, karma, over and above any investigative interventions or detective prowess on behalf of the law agencies. The police stumbled on Peter Sutcliffe one night purely by accident. Edmund Kemper got fed up with not being apprehended, so turned himself in. Dennis Nielsen called out a plumber because his drains were blocked by the body parts he'd disposed of, as it turns out. These people aren't criminal geniuses, mostly. Hannibal Lecter, they ain't. But the police do find them especially tricky to identify and arrest. Maybe because they don't stand out as people. They are generally nondescript, faceless nobodies who don't warrant significant scrutiny or attention. They embody the banality of evil on the outside. That's why, when they are exposed, people routinely respond with stock phrases like, "I'd never have thought it of him," and "he was such a quiet person, kept himself to himself." Well, yeah, his hobbies included butchering and raping and wearing the skins of his victims and dancing the fandango on the kitchen table at midnight with a red rose up his arse screaming, "Beware China." He's hardly going to advertise. Which brings me on to John Reginald Halliday Christie, known to his nearest and dearest as Reg. Between the years of 1943 and 1953, Christie murdered at least 7 women and 1 infant at the premises of his ground floor flat at 10 Rillington Place, Notting Hill in London. Reg had been mustard gassed in World War I, which reportedly left him unable to raise his voice, so he spoke in a semi-whisper. He was a convicted petty criminal, done time, had been in the St. John's Ambulance Service, and was a special constable chocolate copper during the Second World War. He got that gig when the authorities failed to check him out for a criminal record. A work-shy hypochondriac, he was nonetheless latterly employed as a clerk in a radio factory. He was a fantasist who misrepresented himself to some of his victims as an ex-medical practitioner to gain their confidence. He would lure them back to his home when his wife was away under the pretext of treating them for migraines or other ailments or for termination of pregnancy. Then he would gas them into unconsciousness, rape them repeatedly and strangle them to death. He buried some in the back garden, some behind the internal walls of the property, and, as in the case of his wife whom he killed when she threatened to leave him, under the living room floorboards. By 1953, out of work, unable to pay rent, and having sold any furniture and other belongings of any value, he left 10 Rillington Place to stay at hostels or wander London sleeping rough. By this time, the human remains at his former residence had been discovered, and he was a wanted man. Early one morning, he was, quite by chance, challenged by a copper on the beat on the embankment by Putney Bridge. He was identified and arrested. Before we go on, I feel I must explain something for the benefit of younger viewers. You might not understand the phrase copper on the beat. Well, in the long ago time, policemen and women used to walk around in the great outdoors, covering a specified geographical area which was known as their beat. They would be keeping an eye out for anything untoward, reassuring the public, being a presence in the community, and acting as a deterrent to criminal activity. This process has long since been replaced by sitting on one's arse in front of a computer screen playing solitaire or Tetris, or sitting on one's arse in a police vehicle with a speed gun or camera to catch those evil bastard motorists doing 32 in a 30 zone. The cut and thrust of modern law enforcement, has it ever been so dynamic? Anyway, Christie confessed to all the murders apart from the infant Geraldine. I'll explain about her in a bit, but was only tried for that of his wife, which speeded up the trial process, no doubt. He rolled out the old not guilty by reason of insanity scam, but it didn't wash, and he was found guilty of murder and hanged by the neck until dead at Pentonville Prison on 15th of July 1953. Not only was Christie responsible for the deaths of at least 8 people, he was also instrumental in one of the most appalling miscarriages of justice ever perpetrated by the British legal system, the wrongful conviction and execution of Timothy Evans. Evans was a Welshman and colossal dim bulb. By today's standards, he would have been a hair's breadth away from a diagnosis of learning disability, but back then he was just called plain illiterate and a congenital idiot. In 1948, Evans and his young wife Beryl and baby daughter Geraldine moved into the top floor flat at 10 Rillington Place. Christie murdered Beryl, who was pregnant, and baby Geraldine, and manipulated events so that Evans took the blame. He was tried, found guilty, and hanged in 1950. Christie was a witness for the prosecution at his trial. What a guy. Mad? Yeah, but unfortunately, all too true. Theoretically, Christie denied killing the baby Geraldine for 2 reasons. He thought such an admission would be unlikely to elicit sympathy from a jury. You don't say. And he feared, if incarcerated, what his fellow inmates might do to a confessed baby killer. Much later, the murder of baby Geraldine was also attributed to him by the authorities, but it took until 1966 for Evans to be pardoned, posthumously. Bit late to do him much good. In 1972, unaware of any of this, I'm sat in my usual place in the dark of the Market Hall Cinema in Braemar, and this repulsively fascinating and hypnotic story unfolded before my eyes. I've seen it many times since, and each time it loses little, if any, of its shocking impact. It's that tragic a tale, and that good a film. American director Richard Fleischer had an eclectic career. He made some big-budget Hollywood blockbusters with some major Hollywood stars, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Vikings, and Barabbas. Westerns such as Bandido and The Spikes Gang. He turned his hand to cult sci-fi with Fantastic Voyage and Soylent Green. The box office bomb of a musical, Dr. Dolittle. The box office hit of a musical, The Jazz Singer, the one with Neil Diamond, not the first talky one with Al Jolson. Pulpy crime thrillers, The Don Is Dead and Mr. Majestic. Exploitational fare with the infamous Deep Southern Fried Slave-a-thon Mandingo. An utter mindless B-movie horror dross with Amityville 3D, possibly a career low point. I could mention Conan the Destroyer and Red Sonja, but let's not trash the man's reputation needlessly, because he does have a reputation as something of a thoughtful craftsman, and this is evident in 3 excellent films he made which follow something of a certain trajectory. He made 3 true crime movies centered on murders and murderers. Compulsion in 1959 was based on Meyer Levin's fictionalized account of the Leopold and Loeb case. In 1924, 2 rich privileged college students with a warped interest in Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of Superman plan and execute the kidnap and murder of a 14-year-old schoolboy to enact what they see as the perfect crime, the sort of doomed intellectual exercise depicted earlier in Hitchcock's Rope. They want to prove their superiority over all us mere mortals who don't kidnap and murder 14-year-old schoolboys. Well, seeing as how they got caught, they just proved that they were 2 deviant arseholes who were either go into prison for the rest of their lives or wind up river dancing at the end of a rope. The core of the film is the court case in which Orson Welles plays a thinly disguised Clarence Darrow. How he is going to save them from capital punishment and get them life sentences instead is the thrust of the action here, so it becomes a courtroom drama. In 1968, Fleischer directed The Boston Strangler, a very stylish and kinetic depiction of the activities and ensuing manhunt for Albert DeSalvo, a psychosexual serial killer of 13 women from 1962 to 1964 in the Boston area of the US. It features an against-type Tony Curtis as DeSalvo, and he gives a performance of his life, and Henry Fonda as the detective on his tail. Criticised at the time for being tasteless and exploitative, these days it is viewed as a classic piece of cinema. One of the first major Hollywood movies to use split-screen techniques in a constructive way, it's a gripping, if flashy, work. Doubt as to DeSalvo's guilt, by the way, was dispelled in 2013 through the use of retrospective DNA profiling techniques. He did it, folks. Fast forward to 1971 and 10 Rillington Place is released. Out of the three films, this is the most authentic representation of real-life events. It follows closely the source material, a book of the same name by Scottish journalist and broadcaster Ludovic Kennedy. There are some cosmetic changes to the on-screen version. The eventual discovery of the bodies of the victims was by the landlord of the property, not by two West Indian guys moving in as depicted in the film. But for the most part, the events and the realistic way in which they are portrayed mirror what actually happened. In fact, the location filming was in Rillington Place itself, so the exteriors you see on screen are of the actual house. What the film does extremely well is to portray a post-war Britain through a grubby visual spectrum that is predominantly grey, black, white and brown, like a sepia image struggling to keep out any brighter, more vibrant colours that are trying to seep in. Notting Hill is not the Richard Curtis, Hugh Grant world of endless sunshine, life, effervescent little bookshops, lively coffee bars and upbeat pop music. No, it's a grubby shithole of three-storey slum housing, with hot and cold running damp, outdoor toilets, cafes and pubs full of smoke, condensation and bacteria. It's a depressing place in a depressing time. No bubbly pop tunes here, just John Dankworth's somber jazz stylings and the deafening howl and clatter of passing trains as a soundtrack to lives being slowly laid waste by dying or dead ambition. This is a heads up if you're expecting a groovy laugh-a-thon. It definitely is not that sort of film, Pilgrim. By the time Timothy Evans and his wife Beryl and baby Geraldine fatefully land on Christie's doorstep, we've already seen him lure a woman back to his dump, gas, rape, strangle and bury her in the claustrophobic little wasteland that passes for a back garden. Whilst digging her grave, the leg of an earlier victim pops into view. Even if you don't know the story, it's a clear indicator of what's been happening and where this is going. At the time, Richard Attenborough was building a reputation as a blueprint movie lovey. To some, he was an unlikely choice to play Christie. Let me tell you here and now, his performance is a revelation. This is an eternal reminder of what a superb actor he was capable of being. He was not normally associated with the role of villain, but maybe people had forgotten that one of his earliest movie appearances was as the chilling and murderous Pinky Brown, the juvenile leader of a razor gang in the first screen version of Graham Greene's Brighton Rock. He nailed that part, and here he nails Christie. The sibilant, whispering voice, the bald head, the thick-lensed National Health glasses, the slightly fey mannerisms, the banality of evil. A mask concealing his true self, only really exposed when he kills, when he unleashes his rage, anger, deviancy and perversion, with an intensity suggesting the vilest horrors that are thankfully never explicitly shown on screen. It's all done with body language, voice and expression. The power of suggestion. Like I said, a revelation. If acting awards were ever bestowed sincerely, objectively, without bending the knee to populism, politics and trends, Dickie would have won a truckload for this performance. As it was, George C. Scott got the Oscar that year for Patton. The BAFTA went to Robert Redford. Jesus H. Christmas. John Hurt is fine as Timothy Evans, although his Welsh accent, I won't lie to you, is just a little bit overdone. However, he projects a marvellous sense of a very mentally challenged individual who has only nominal understanding of what is happening and how and why it is happening to him. The police coerce a confession out of him, which he later retracts, but the damage is done. The only thing he knows is Christie is guilty and he isn't. When asked in court what he thinks Christie's motive would have been in killing his wife and daughter, all he can think to say is, well, he was home all day. Hurt skillfully expresses an acute impression of the cogs turning slowly in Evans' head, but so ineffectively that coherent thought processes are beyond him. Painfully sad to watch the destruction of a vulnerable man, one prone to childlike storytelling and exaggeration, but ultimately harmless, the sort of innocent the law should protect, but instead hauls to the gallows. When Evans is sentenced, Christie breaks down and weeps in the courtroom. Onlookers think it an emotional outpouring of sadness and grief, but somehow, instinctively, through very nuanced body language, Attenborough subtly conveys to the audience that it is in fact relief, that he is in the clear, he's got away with it, and someone else is going to pay for his crimes. Honestly, this is masterclass stuff. 10 Rillington Place is like a compelling historical document brought to life. It gives the viewer a window on a living, breathing world of low-rent, down-at-heel people in a low-rent, down-at-heel environment where a seedy little man you would hardly ever notice perpetrates undetected horrors you would hardly ever imagine. It doesn't get much of a look in these days, but quality-wise, in terms of acting, direction, writing, and what it says about human evil, morality, and the frailty of justice and the justice system, it's worth a million Star Wars or superhero pantomimes. 10 Rillington Place is not a nice place to visit, and you would most certainly not want to stay there, but it is an essential view, and one I recommend to both thinkers and drinkers alike. Thank you as always for your time and attention. If this video has sparked your engine in any way, please feel free to strike like, foment a comment, or imbibe on subscribe. Meanwhile, here's a song called It Couldn't Happen Here. Speak up and get shut down. The bully boys have got your number. You better stay out of their town, or you'll wind up 6 feet under. They don't wanna talk about it. No discussion, no debate. The only opinion you get to have is the one they decide they don't hate. Burning the books, priming the rack, spreading the cancer of fear. Into the blockhouse, the old times are back, and they said it didn't happen here. Stand up and be cast out by student body cancellation. Don't care what you're talking about, cause they're not into conversation. They don't want to analyze it, ill-considered, unawares. The only viewpoint they permit is the one that's the same as theirs. Burning the books, priming the rack, spreading the cancer of fear. Into the chamber, the old times are back, and they said it didn't happen here. Their brown shirts are tie-dyed in shades for diversity. They can't disguise what they are, reconstructed fascists on a power trip. Burning the books, priming the rack, spreading the cancer of fear. Into the gulag, the old times are back, and they said it couldn't happen here. Strangle the truth, killing the news, everything ever held dear. Into the death camp and turning the screws, and they said it couldn't happen here.